Okay, hello, this is Caleb Aurand, and I'm doing a class 2 for Austin Coding Academy blog prompt. And so the questions that we're going to go over today, and I'm going to switch to share my screen here so we can see and look at those, are what do you find challenging about coding? And then talk about a project that disappointed you. What would you change? List 3 key things to consider when coding with SEO, that's search engine optimization, in mind, and list 5 or more ways you could optimize a website to be as efficient and scalable as possible. And so we're going to dive into a couple of these questions here. And the first one, what do you find challenging about coding? And I think that probably the most challenging thing I find about coding is actually if you need to start from a blank slate. Uh, if you are starting with a project idea and you don't know where to go from there and what steps you need to break down into that project, or even maybe worse, you're starting with you have an idea kind of what you think you want to do, but you don't know what the idea for that project actually is or would look like. You want to solve a problem, but then you don't know how to solve that problem using code. That is a really difficult place to start in. And I remember one YouTuber's recommendation that you don't try to solve the world's problems with code. You try to break down into a smaller piece of what you can actually manage, what you can make a difference in this world with your code. And so you could, if we're looking at a blank page here, you could start out with, if I want to solve world peace or create world peace, or then that's not something that's really going to be possible. World hunger, what about that? With code, maybe not, but maybe you could break that down to how could I optimize a farm? Optimize a farm. What about a watering system schedule? What about maybe reminders for when to fertilize the soil, when to use fertilizer, automate automate watering. Those are things that actually can be code could be used for to solve those problems. It's not too hard to write a simple script that maybe sends you an email or sends you an alert to your phone, or some a website that if you see it every day, it pops up at the same time every day, every week, every month, etc., to show you, hey, it's time to go do this thing. For a watering schedule, that might be a little bit more complicated. I mean, if you're going to try to automate that watering yourself, if you're going to write that code to then maybe activate a Raspberry Pi or some other type of small motorized circuit that actually does something physical in the world, that's going to be a little bit harder. You're going to have to learn a little bit new code, but this is probably the hardest thing that's about code, is getting this idea, breaking it down to what can actually be done, and then breaking it down into the steps of how you're actually going to code that out. That's, I think, the hardest part of code. That's the most challenging part of it, breaking it down to those things that you can actually change on a step-by-step basis, writing out then this function takes in this thing, and then it changes it in this way, and then it returns and outputs it in this form, so that you take in this time and you read that so that you can know when it's time to send that alert to send to the user's profile saying, hey, it's time to water the garden, or something like that. How about a project that's disappointed you? What would you change? I think it's the projects where I didn't do this. I didn't take the time to think out step by step by step by step what each function I want it to do, and I want it to change, and then I want it to output. And so now that I've worked on a project where it's I know what I want it to do, what I want it to take in, and what I want it to output. If I'm working on the gradebook application I was working on recently, I want a student to be able to put in their name, put in their email address, put in their password, and it takes all that in, it takes that information in, and it gives them something back and returns something to them, like that JSON web token for their login, with holding on to maybe their user ID, or holding on to their student ID, or holding on to some type of information that they're going to need to access the rest of their information in the application. So how about list three key things to consider when coding with SEO in mind? And so I have a little bit of an article up here, and I was searching, do search engines use the IDs and classes of HTML elements as clues? And so it's a interesting question. So I just was wondering, if I change my class name to instead like class number 3 to something like, I think somebody had the recommendation of down here of like changing an ID or something to say, I missed it, but changing it from, I think it was a news source. So changing it from just column 1 to news column, for example, will that change your search engine results? And it seems from right now, it doesn't seem like it actually will change anything. And so the best way, I think, for optimizing your search engine, so if we optimize search engine results in the taskbar here, you can get some recommendations. And some of the first ones are: publish relevant, authoritative content, update your content regularly, using metadata, having a link-worthy site, using alt tags. These are simple things using HTML. It's not your web page is the fanciest and uses the most JavaScript or something like that. Is just simple things. So using things like the header tag, using the body tag, using the footer tag, things like using tags within your metadata that it's in your head bracket. And so if we inspect this page maybe and look at it, if we're going way up to here to the head tag and we're clicking on that, maybe it's using some information here in this. So whether it's images, whether it's some tags, or like things that you want a user, that if they're putting in like typing in something, searching for dogs or searching for cats or searching for animals, then you have those types of specific tags linked into your head of, hey, this site is about those things. And then putting them into articles and putting them into paragraphs and putting them into these section like heads, so that as either the Google search engine or some other crawler is going through that, they're looking for those articles, for those sections and for those paragraphs and for those H2s and some of those heads. And then also just remembering, if you are not going to be publishing a lot of content, then that's even the more important for all those things to be there in the first place, with links, anchor tags that have links that people can click on that bring them to your website, because Google and other search crawlers will look for that as well. So optimizing for all those things, and then speeding up the pages is one of the recommendations here. So having a link-worthy site, using alt tags in your images. If you're not using the alt tag in your images, you might not have a optimized search results when people are searching for things in your area for that website. So those are the recommendations I would have. So if we're looking at 5 or more ways you could optimize a website to be as efficient and scalable as possible, I'd do this. I'd also, when you're going through creating a website, not create div after div after div after div after div after div after div, because that will make it really hard for somebody that's using a screen reader to navigate through all of those divs just to be able to see your content. It might really help you for your spacing of each individual div bracket or something that you want to space out. But I'd start with way up top, use that section, then use that article, and then if you need to within that, maybe use a div, but then use some paragraphs in there too. and those block level elements will help you with your search results. So those are my recommendations. Those are the answers I have for these blog prompts for today. I hope that's helpful to somebody.